No matter where you're from, your country has problems. It's easy to dump on the United States with the stains of slavery, indigenous genocide, and civil rights violations throughout its history. But is all that unique to the USA?
No.
Think of the safest countries in the world. Where comes to mind? Maybe somewhere in Asia like Japan or South Korea. How about Western Europe, places like Spain or Portugal? Some would say Australia, Iceland, or Canada.
Oh my God! What the hell is that?
I'll bet a lot of you thought of Sweden. Yes, Sweden, the land of flavorless meatballs, the car that everyone's aunt drives, and the furniture brand that breaks just as your neighbor is sitting down with that glass of water you brought him.
Enjoy your affordable Swedish crap.
Sweden is traditionally considered one of the safest countries on the planet. But in a December 2023 edition of an annual study by Berkshire Hathaway on the safest countries in the world to travel, Sweden did not even crack the top 15.
Come on, don't bullshit me.
It might surprise you to know that Sweden has been ravaged by gun violence, bombings, and gang warfare for just over a decade. In fact, there were 11 shooting deaths in September 2023 alone, the worst month ever since records started in 2016. That's right, this type of violence was so rare in Sweden that they didn't even keep track of it until halfway through the 2010s. That same month, a bomb targeting rival gang members detonated in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The blast was so strong that it destroyed the facades of 5 houses and killed an innocent woman. 45 people lost their lives to gunfire in 2021. That number rose to 62 a year later across 391 shootings. So what happened? How did this peaceful Nordic nation all of a sudden become a gang-infested danger zone with enough bombings to make the milkman bad guy from the Living Daylights blush? How could one of the safest countries on the planet devolve into such violence in just a decade? Ultimately, it comes down to 3 things. 1. Kids. Yes, kids, stick with me on this one. 2. The Swedish criminal justice system. 3. And the influx of asylum seekers. Today, we dig into why Sweden has problems with gang violence. Let's start back in 2014. The conflicts that erupted out of the Arab Spring, the mass protests that arose against the governments in Tunisia, Syria, Yemen, and other Arab nations are in full swing. Syria and Yemen are drenched in civil war. ISIS is gaining power in Iraq. A coup and insurgency strikes Egypt. Hundreds of millions of people watch as their lives become complete chaos. Humanitarian crises pop up almost by the day as millions of displaced refugees look for shelter around the world. Wanting to help those in need, Sweden opens its doors to 81,300 asylum claims, a 50% increase from the previous year and the highest number since 1992. They take in 63,000 asylees, a whopping 77% of those who filed, with 47% of those filings coming from Syria alone. A year later in 2015, noticing the lenient acceptance rate, asylum claims spike to 162,877. Almost overnight, Sweden has increased its total population by nearly 2%. Now, Sweden is far from a small country. By landmass, it's the largest Nordic country, the 5th largest country in all of Europe, and slightly bigger than the state of California. But most of the population is consolidated in the bottom third of the land, where cities like Stockholm, Malmö, and Gothenburg are.
You made those words up.
It would be hard for any country to house, feed, and care for a sudden 2% spike in its population. So where did the government put all of these displaced people? Why, into low-income housing in ghettos, practically segregated from the general Swedish population. Surrounded by those who look like them, speak their language, and understand their customs, integration isn't exactly at the forefront of their daily lives. Many lack access to work or schooling, or choose to live off of government handouts and welfare. As a result, many turn to gang crime, dealing drugs, selling weapons, or even working as assassins against rival gangs. Most shocking of all, many of these criminals are children under the age of 18. In Sweden, the current age of criminal responsibility is 16 years old. Courts either refuse to prosecute those under 16 or serve very lenient sentences without any juvenile detention time served. They also do not face the same police controls, such as surveillance, that adults do. Knowing this, criminal gang members recruit teens as drug couriers, weapons traffickers, and even assassins. With an influx of drugs and weapons, and a court system seemingly unable or unwilling to prosecute young teens, gun violence and even bombings have spiked significantly in Sweden. According to the Swedish National Council for Crime Prevention, young migrant teens participating as proxies in drug and gun turf wars has led to a gun homicide rate 2.5 times higher than the European average. In 2022, 62 people were shot dead in Sweden, up from 45 in 2021, a 38% increase. Stockholm's gun murder rate is 30 times, yes, 30, higher than London, which has its own issues. Shockingly, one section of Stockholm alone, a so-called no-go zone, one of 61 migrant-filled slums in the country that do not have adequate police protection or emergency response, had more homicides in 2022 than the entire country of Norway. But what does the Swedish government call these no-go zones? Why, exclusion zones, or parallel societies, a much more inclusive, inoffensive term for crime-infested, dangerous ghettos where homicides are as common as blowing your nose. Bombings are more common nowadays too, and not just in these so-called exclusion zones, but in formerly peaceful neighborhoods as well. Locals caught in the crossfire are afraid to go out past 8 p.m. Again, a decade ago, this was considered the safest country on the planet. Now people are too afraid to hit the drive-thru at 8:01.
I'll have 2 number 9s, a number 9 large, a number 6 with extra dip, a number 7.
Gang leaders, many of whom don't even live in the country, choosing to operate from their native Syria, Iraq, or former Yugoslavian states, make threats of violence against those they don't like.
Hörde jag man, jag Benzema eller? Hey brother, hörde jag $1 million eller?
In a video on Instagram last year, quote-unquote Swedish rapper Fifutai. Anyway, this guy brandished a golden gun surrounded by machine gun-toting gang members, hurled insults and threats at rival gang members, and even a Swedish prosecutor, and dispelled rumors that he had been killed. But voiceover guy, what's the big deal? This is gang violence. Not in a gang? Not a problem. Well, call me old-fashioned, but I prefer to live in a place where gun violence and drug dealing isn't a part of daily life, and where I don't have to fear the bleeping facade of my house getting blown into orbit. Sweden was a peaceful nation. It deserves to be a peaceful nation again, but it's going to take some tough admissions and actions to make it so. To fix a problem, you have to first admit you have one.
My name is Barney, and I'm an alcoholic.
Mr. Gumbo, this is a Girl Scout meeting.
Is it? Or is it that you girls can't admit you have a problem?
But Sweden, Or at least its leftist government back in 2017 couldn't even do that. Every 10 years, from 1995 to present, the government organization, the Swedish National Council for Crime Prevention, updated their statistics on crime with respect to national or immigration background of criminals. When a parliament member asked the government in 2017 to update these statistics, as the 2015 report was overdue, they declined.
Why are you the way that you are? Honestly.
In fact, Sweden's Minister of Justice, Morgan Johansson, does not believe that a report on registered crime and the origin of individuals would add knowledge with the potential to improve Swedish society. The uncomfortable truth from the 2005 version of the report is that the foreign-born population in Sweden was twice as likely to be suspected of crime than the native-born population. In fact, in 2021, researchers discovered that young people born to parents from abroad were overrepresented as robbery and murder suspects. Now, some of you tolerant and brave souls out there are probably screaming, well, that's profiling. No. When a crime is reported to the police, they investigate. Then they try to figure out who did it. That's called solving crime. Something Sweden should maybe look into doing again.
Only in NCIS LA.
So step 1. Admit there is a problem with unfettered immigration. That is not racist, bigoted, or discriminatory to say. You are not violating any laws, nor are you denying someone their human rights by saying it. Access to a native population's taxpayers is not a human right.
The finger thing means the taxes.
Fortunately, the 2022 right-wing government seems to finally admit that immigration maybe had something to do with the rise in gang violence. In late 2023, Foreign Minister Billström told the BBC, "We can now see that outside ship and lack of integration, in combination with trade of narcotics and organized crime, is creating this very, very toxic mixture." Which brings step 2. Immigrants need to integrate. Every country on this planet has its own history, culture, and customs. If you want to live there, you must at the very least respect these things and not trample all over them. This applies to Swedish immigrants too, whether you're from Syria or the USA. You want to live in Sweden? Then learn Swedish, attend Swedish school, get a job, and become a respectful and compassionate member of society. Do not start bombing buildings, running guns, and selling drugs. But that does not mean the Swedish government is off the hook. You are the ones who brought in these people, dumped them in segregated zones, failed to help put them in school and to work, and handed out ATM cards with a, "Now don't you vote in our elections because you're not allowed."
Ender, you said wink wink out loud.
No, I didn't. Raise middle finger.
Yes, increasing the police budget and utilizing military intelligence will help reduce crime, but it doesn't solve it. It takes both sides, the immigrants and the government together, to make Sweden safe again. There has been some progress of late. In 2023, the government made it an offense to recruit children for criminal purposes. And then, wait, 2023? Last year? This wasn't a law. Wouldn't this be the first thing you'd want to make law? Like, how is this not a law? Why wouldn't you punish me for raising kids to commit crimes? They also want to double prison sentences for gun crimes and explosions. The last step would be to make immigration harder. To the new government's credit, they appear to be doing that. They want to make it harder for non-EU immigrants to get Swedish social benefits. Additionally, compulsory preschool for immigrant children would help alleviate language problems and improve integration into Swedish society. When you aren't giving out visas like candy, you won't get as many bad apples coming in. Immigration can be a valuable asset to a country, but not when it is abused. Whenever a country goes from literally the safest place on the planet to not even in the top 15 in 10 years, yeah, people are gonna ask some questions. Uncomfortable questions at that might lead to even more uncomfortable answers. Now, Does this mean that every immigrant in Sweden is some drug-peddling, gun-toting criminal? No, it doesn't. But enough of them are that it has caused a real issue, one that reflects poorly on the entire immigrant community, perhaps a tad unfairly. But what I think we can all agree on is if you're a violent criminal, whether you're native-born or from somewhere else, you can get the hell out of civilized society. Nations have every right to deport those who show they cannot live peaceably among their citizens, Sweden included. Thank you for watching, and feel free to subscribe to learn why your country has problems.